stress comes because we're in a hyperconnected world. Explain.
What we were seeing in there, and I'll tell you a story of how this work got started. It was a first interview. It was a lovely person, British accent from the UK life science executive, and I won't try to mimic that for your listeners and butcher that, but it was really fantastic interview. And what we were focused on was what are the legitimate ways that relationships affect our well-being when we look at it in terms of how they impact our physical health, how we grow in and out of our profession, how we experience purpose in our lives, and then how we get a resilience, right? And so that was the real emphasis early on. Those were legitimate ways we could see the role of relationships and having impact on well-being. And our focus was on trying to move it past some of the current work that's really saying you need two or three best friends, right? You need a couple of quality connections, which is very true, but that's tough to make actionable for people, as advice on what you need to go do. So very first interview, and I put this question out there. So I'd love you to tell me about a time in your life where you're becoming more physically healthy, and not what you did, but what was the role of the connections around you that got you into this, helped you persist, made you, see your world differently, whatever it may be. And she proceeded to tell me this amazing story about being somebody that, dodged every physical activity she could up until her, mid to late 30s. And then life and profession took over, and her doctor gave her a stern warning and said, you can't keep doing this. And her resolution to that was to start walking around a park, outside of her flat in London. And she, started bumping into the same people. And so they did longer walks and then a charity run. And, you flash forward 10 years. And she was telling me a story that she had become somebody that would plan vacations with her husband where they would run a marathon together first, right? And then go on the vacation. And so it was an amazing story of transformation, and the connections were a critical piece of it. She said, it wasn't just that they held me accountable, it was that they made me somebody different and new. I was spending time with a diversity of people I'd never bumped into as a life science executive. They saw me at my worst, I saw them at their worst. So this interview is going 100 miles a minute. I'm thinking if we get hundreds more of these, we have another New York Times bestseller for Karen here. Everything's going to be great. And then I, quickly asked midway through, I said, well, what got you in trouble to begin with? And this interview that was going 100 miles a minute went down to nothing, and she just looked at me for probably 30, 45 seconds, not a single word from either one of us. And she finally said, I don't really know, something like just life, I guess. And we really dug into that, and the small ways that stress had embedded in her day to day, week to week, years to years, that was all coming at her through connections. And some of them were interactions that were conventionally how we would think about stress, maybe sensing misalignment with a colleague and trying to figure out how to deal with that, or seeing somebody that needs to be coached and trying to figure out how to deal with that. But some of it was positive. Seeing a child that she cared about struggling in certain ways and trying to figure out what to do about that, right? None of this was insurmountable for successful people. And so I loved what you were just saying about success, right? Because I think that's one of the problems is as successful people, we're taught that these are all small things. Of course, we overcome these. The problem is that we're getting hit with a volume, velocity, and pace of these things that we have never experienced before because of the way we're all hyper-connected. And to your point, what happens is our brains don't register it. We don't kick into fight or flight mode, but our bodies absorb this through the day. And we end up going home at night exhausted, but can't quite put a finger, on what just happened.
What it is.